The dust from the main street of Palisade, Colorado swirled around Katherine Reynolds's worn boots as she stood outside her general store, watching the sun paint the Rocky Mountains gold in the distance, wondering if 43 years on this earth meant she had already lived all the adventure God intended for her. She had opened the store at dawn as she did every morning, swept the wooden planks of the porch, arranged the canned goods and bolts of fabric just so. And now here she stood with nothing but the evening breeze and her own thoughts for company. The year was 1878, and Palisade was growing from a small trading post into a proper town with the arrival of the railroad, but Katherine felt like she was shrinking instead of expanding with it. "Katherine, you are being foolish," she muttered to herself, turning back toward the door. But before she could step inside, she heard the distinctive sound of a horse approaching at an easy trot. She glanced over her shoulder and saw a man she didn't recognize riding a handsome bay gelding down the street. He was tall in the saddle, with dark hair that touched his collar and a well-worn hat that had seen better days. His clothes were clean but practical, the kind a working man wore, not a gambler or a dandy. He pulled up in front of her store and touched the brim of his hat. "Evening, madam." "This the general store?" "It is," Katherine said, smoothing her apron out of habit. "We're about to close for the night, but if you need something urgently, I can help you." "I'm much obliged." The man dismounted with the easy grace of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. Up close, Katherine could see he was probably in his early 40s, with fine lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often and deeper ones that spoke of harder times. "Name's Lucas Whitmore. I just hired on at the cattle ranch about 5 miles west of here. Thought I'd introduce myself to the folks in town." "Katherine Reynolds," she said, offering her hand. His grip was firm but gentle, calloused but warm. "Welcome to Palisade. The ranch you are talking about, that would be the Morrison place. They run good cattle there." "That's what I heard." Lucas smiled, and Katherine felt something unexpected flutter in her chest. She pushed it away firmly. She was too old for such nonsense. "I was hoping to pick up a few supplies. Nothing fancy. Some coffee, beans, maybe some bacon if you have it. I have all of that." Katherine led him inside, grateful for the dimmer light that might hide the color she felt rising in her cheeks. What was wrong with her? She had served hundreds of customers over the years without acting like a schoolgirl. As she gathered his supplies, Lucas looked around the store with genuine interest. "You have a nice setup here. Been in business long." 15 years, Katherine said, weighing out the coffee beans. "My late husband and I opened it together back in '63. He passed in '72. "I'm sorry for your loss." Lucas's voice was sincere, not just offering empty condolences. "Thank you. It's been 6 years now. I have made my peace with it." Katherine wrapped the items carefully. "Where are you from originally, Mr. Whitmore? Call me Lucas, please." "I have been working ranches all over. Most recently I was down in New Mexico Territory, but before that, Wyoming, Montana, even did a stint in Texas, though the heat near killed me." He counted out coins from a worn leather pouch. "I'm getting to the age where I would like to settle somewhere for more than a season or two." "Well, Palisade is a good place for that," Katherine said, accepting his payment. "It's growing but not too fast. Good people here for the most part." Lucas gathered his supplies but seemed in no hurry to leave. "Would you mind if I asked you a question, Mrs. Reynolds?" "Miss Reynolds, actually. I went back to my maiden name after my husband passed. And no, I don't mind. Is there a decent boarding house in town?" "The ranch provides a bunkhouse, but I would prefer my own space if I can afford it. Mrs. Chen runs a clean boarding house 2 streets over on Maple Street. Her late husband worked on the railroad, and she takes in lodgers. Fair prices, and she's an excellent cook." Katherine found herself adding, She serves dinner at 6 every evening if you are interested. I appreciate the information. Lucas tipped his hat again. I imagine I will be seeing you regularly, Miss Reynolds. A man can't get by without a good general store. After he left, Katherine locked up and walked to her small house behind the store. It was a tidy two-room structure with a bedroom and a main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room combined. She had her books, her rocking chair, her cook stove, and her memories. It had been enough for 6 years, but that night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about Lucas Whitmore's kind eyes and easy smile. "You are being ridiculous," she told herself firmly. "You are too old for romance." The next morning, Katherine was surprised when Lucas appeared at her store shortly after she opened. He looked freshly shaved and his clothes, while still work-worn, were clean. "Morning, Miss Reynolds," he said cheerfully. "I realized last night that I forgot to get any sugar." "Can't abide coffee without it." "Of course." Katherine measured out a pound of sugar, trying to ignore how her hands wanted to tremble. "How was Mrs. Chen's boarding house?" "Clean as a whistle and the best roast chicken I have had in years. You were right to recommend it." Lucas accepted the wrapped sugar. "She mentioned there's a church social this coming Saturday. Are you planning to attend?" "I hadn't thought about it," Katherine admitted. In truth, she usually avoided such events. Being a widow at these gatherings meant either being pitied or being cornered by well-meaning friends trying to set her up with whatever single man was available, regardless of compatibility. "Would you consider going if you had an escort?" Lucas asked. His tone was casual, but Katherine saw the hope in his eyes. Her first instinct was to refuse. She was 43 years old, for heaven's sake. Too old to be courted like some young girl. Too old to entertain romantic notions. Too old to risk her heart again. But before she could voice any of these thoughts, Lucas spoke again. "I don't mean to be forward, Miss Reynolds. I just thought it might be nice to attend with someone who could introduce me around properly. I'm willing to pay for your time if that makes it more of a business arrangement." "Pay me?" Katherine felt a flash of indignation. "Mr. Whitmore, I am not a social escort for hire." No, I didn't mean it like that." Lucas looked genuinely distressed. "I apologize. I'm not good at this. What I meant to say is that I would be honored if you would accompany me to the church social as my guest. I find you easy to talk to, and I would enjoy your company. That's all." Katherine studied him for a long moment. He looked sincere, almost vulnerable. When was the last time a man had looked at her like that? When was the last time she had felt even the slightest flutter of interest? "I'm too old for romance," she sighed, more to herself than to him. But Lucas heard her, and he shook his head firmly. "I disagree with that entirely, Miss Reynolds. You seem just the right age to me, but I'm not asking for romance. I'm just asking for the pleasure of your company at a church social. Will you go with me?" Against her better judgment, Katherine found herself nodding. "Yes, all right. The social starts at 2 o'clock on Saturday." Lucas's face lit up with a smile that made him look years younger. "Thank you. I promise you won't regret it." After he left, Katherine's friend Martha Hutchins came into the store, her eyes bright with curiosity. Martha was a few years younger than Katherine, happily married with 4 grown children, and had a tendency to know everyone's business. "Was that the new ranch hand from the Morrison place?" Martha asked, pretending to examine a display of ribbons. "It was," Katherine said, keeping her voice neutral. "He's handsome." "I hadn't noticed." "Katherine Reynolds, you are a terrible liar." Martha grinned. "He was in here an awful long time just to buy sugar. He asked me to attend the church social with him." Martha actually clapped her hands together. "Oh, how wonderful! What did you say?" "I said yes, though I must be losing my mind. Martha, I am too old for this. I am 43 years old." So, he looks to be about the same age. Katherine, you have been alone for 6 years. There's nothing wrong with accepting an invitation to a social. Martha's expression softened. You deserve happiness. Thomas would want you to be happy. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes at the mention of her late husband. I know he would, but what if I have forgotten how to do this? What if I make a fool of myself? Then you make a fool of yourself, but I think you will find it's like riding a bicycle. It comes back to you. Martha squeezed her hand. Just enjoy yourself. Don't overthink it. The days leading up to Saturday passed both too quickly and too slowly. Katherine found herself thinking about Lucas more than she wanted to admit. He came into the store twice more during the week, once for tobacco and once for new work gloves, and each time they talked a little longer than necessary. She learned that he had never been married, that he loved to read but rarely had access to books, and that he had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh despite herself. On Saturday morning, Katherine found herself standing in front of her small wardrobe, trying to decide what to wear. Most of her dresses were practical work clothes in browns and grays. But in the back, wrapped carefully in muslin, was a dress she hadn't worn in years. It was a soft blue calico with white flowers, one she had made herself back when Thomas was still alive. She pulled it out and held it up, wondering if it would still fit, wondering if she was being foolish. Too old for romance, she muttered again, but she put on the dress anyway. It still fit, though perhaps a bit more snugly than it once had. She braided her dark hair, which was now shot through with silver, and pinned it up in a simple style. When she looked in her small mirror, she was surprised to see that she looked almost pretty. Not young, but not old either. Just a woman of a certain age preparing for a social outing. Lucas arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, riding his bay gelding and leading a gentle-looking mare. I borrowed her from the ranch, he explained as he helped Katherine mount. She's steady and calm, good for a ride into town. The church social was held in the churchyard and the adjacent field. Tables had been set up with food, and someone had strung paper lanterns in the trees. Children ran around playing games while adults clustered in small groups, talking and laughing. Katherine felt her anxiety rise as they approached, but Lucas seemed to sense it. We can leave any time you want, he said quietly. Just say the word. His understanding helped. As they dismounted and tied up the horses, several people came over to greet them. Martha was there with her husband, and she winked at Katherine in a way that was probably meant to be subtle but wasn't. Reverend Walsh welcomed Lucas warmly and thanked Katherine for bringing him. Mrs. Morrison, the ranch owner's wife, expressed her approval of Lucas as a worker and a man. He's the best hand we have hired in years, she told Katherine. Knows his way around horses and cattle, but more than that, he's honest and reliable. Those qualities are hard to find. As the afternoon wore on, Katherine found herself relaxing. Lucas stayed close but not oppressively so, giving her space to talk to friends while remaining available. He was introduced to what felt like half the town, and he greeted everyone with the same friendly courtesy. He remembered names, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know his new community. When the musicians started playing, Lucas surprised her by asking her to dance. Katherine's immediate instinct was to refuse. She hadn't danced since Thomas died. I'm too old for dancing, she started to say, but Lucas shook his head. There you go again, talking about being too old. Miss Reynolds, I promise you, you are not too old. Will you dance with me? She let him lead her to the area where other couples were dancing. The music was a simple waltz, and after a moment's awkwardness, Katherine found her feet remembering the steps. Lucas was a decent dancer, not fancy but competent, and he held her at a respectful distance. You are a better dancer than you let on, she said. My mother insisted all her sons learn, Lucas admitted. She said there was no excuse for a man to be ignorant of the social graces, even if he was going to spend his life working cattle. How many brothers do you have? Had 3. 2 died in the war and one of fever a few years back. I'm the only one left now. I'm sorry. That must be hard. It is. But it's also why I want to settle somewhere, put down roots. I spent too many years drifting, and I have realized that a man needs more than just work to make a life worth living. He needs community, friends, maybe even. He trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed. Maybe even what? Katherine prompted. Maybe even someone special to share it with, Lucas finished quietly. Katherine's heart did that fluttering thing again, and she looked away, unsure how to respond. Thankfully, the dance ended, and they returned to the refreshment table. But his words stayed with her the rest of the afternoon. As the sun began to set, Lucas helped her back onto the borrowed mare for the ride home. The evening air was cool and pleasant, and the mountains looked purple in the fading light. When they reached her store, Lucas helped her dismount. "Thank you for going with me today," he said. "I know you had reservations, but I hope you enjoyed yourself at least a little." "I did," Katherine admitted. "More than I expected to, honestly. Thank you for asking me." "Would you consider letting me call on you properly?" Lucas asked. "I know you think you are too old for romance, but I disagree. I think you are exactly the right age, at exactly the right time, and I would very much like to get to know you better." Katherine looked at him, at his honest face and hopeful eyes, and felt something inside her that had been frozen for 6 years begin to thaw. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, you may call on me." Lucas's smile could have lit up the whole town. "May I come by tomorrow after church? Maybe we could take a walk, or I could bring some of those books I mentioned and we could discuss them." "I would like that." After he left, Katherine went inside and sat in her rocking chair, her mind whirling. What had she just agreed to? Was she really going to let this man court her? She was 43 years old. She had gray hair and wrinkles and a settled life. She wasn't some young girl with her whole life ahead of her. But then again, maybe that was exactly the point. She wasn't young, but she wasn't dead either. She had years ahead of her, God willing. Did she really want to spend them all alone? The next morning, Katherine took extra care with her appearance before church. She told herself it was just because she wanted to look respectable, but deep down she knew it was because she would see Lucas there. And indeed, when she arrived, he was sitting near the back, and he smiled and waved her over to sit beside him. After the service, true to his word, he appeared at her door with 2 books tucked under his arm. "I wasn't sure what you liked to read," he said, "so I brought 2 different ones. This one is poetry by Walt Whitman, and this one is a novel by Charles Dickens. Have you read either?" "I have read some Dickens, but not this one," Katherine said, taking the books carefully. They were well worn but had obviously been treated with care. "And I haven't read much Whitman." "Thank you for bringing them." They walked together through the town and out to where the Grand River flowed broad and steady. The cottonwoods along the banks were starting to turn golden with the approach of autumn, and the air had that particular clarity that only came in the high country. "Tell me about your husband," Lucas said as they walked. "If you don't mind talking about him." Katherine was surprised by the question. Most people avoided mentioning Thomas as if talking about him would cause her pain, but Lucas seemed genuinely interested. "Thomas was a good man," she said slowly. "He was older than me by about 10 years. We married when I was 22 and he was 32. He had a dream of opening a store in the West, and I wanted adventure, so we came out here together. We built that store from nothing, lived in a tent behind it while we saved enough money to build our house. He worked harder than any man I have ever known." "How did he die?" "He was thrown from a horse. hit his head on a rock. He was unconscious for 3 days and then he was just gone. Katherine felt the familiar ache but also noticed that it wasn't as sharp as it once had been. I was angry for a long time. Angry at the horse, angry at God, angry at Thomas for leaving me. But eventually I realized that anger was just another way of holding on, and I needed to let go. But letting go doesn't mean forgetting, Lucas said. No, it doesn't. I will always love Thomas. He was my first love, my partner, my friend, but he's gone and I'm still here. Katherine looked at Lucas. Is that difficult for you to hear? That I still love my late husband? Not at all. I would be worried if you didn't. Love isn't a finite resource, Miss Reynolds. The fact that you loved him deeply tells me that you are capable of deep love. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. They walked in comfortable silence for a while. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. The river burbled over stones. It was peaceful in a way that Katherine hadn't let herself experience in a long time. "What about you?" she asked. "You said you had never been married. Was there never anyone special?" "There was someone a long time ago," Lucas admitted. "I was young, maybe 25. Her name was Sarah, and she was the daughter of a ranch owner I worked for in Wyoming. We were planning to marry, but then her father found out. He didn't think a simple cowhand was good enough for his daughter. He gave me a choice: leave and never come back, or he would make sure I never worked on a ranch again anywhere in the territory. He had the connections to do it, too." "What did Sarah say?" "I never got to tell her. Her father sent her east to stay with relatives before I could talk to her. I got one letter from her, saying she understood why I had to leave and that she hoped I would find happiness. That was it." Lucas picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. "I convinced myself that it was for the best, that I was meant to be a wanderer. But as I have gotten older, I have realized that I was just afraid of wanting something permanent and having it taken away again." "So what changed?" Katherine asked gently. "I got tired of being afraid." Lucas turned to look at her. "I'm 42 years old, Miss Reynolds. If I don't stop running now, I never will. And when I met you, something in me just knew that you were worth staying for, worth taking a risk for." Katherine felt her breath catch. "Mr. Whitmore, Lucas, you barely know me. I know enough. I know you are strong because you rebuilt your life after losing your husband. I know you are kind because of how you treat your customers, even the difficult ones. I saw you give that little boy a peppermint stick the other day when his mother couldn't afford it. I know you are intelligent from the way you talk and the books on your shelves. And I know you are beautiful, even though you try to hide it behind practical clothes and an all-business manner." "I'm 43, Katherine protested weakly. "And I'm 42. We are the same age, Katherine." "May I call you Katherine?" When she nodded, he continued, "We are old enough to know what we want and young enough to enjoy it. We are old enough to have learned from our mistakes and young enough to make new ones. We are old enough to know that time is precious and young enough to have plenty of it left." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "You make it sound so simple. Isn't it? You either want to explore what this could be between us, or you don't. If you don't, I will respect that and leave you alone. But if you do, then age is just a number. It's not a barrier unless we make it one." Katherine looked at this man who had walked into her life just a week ago and somehow already seen through all her defenses. She thought about going back to her empty house night after night, about spending the rest of her years alone because she was too afraid or too convinced she was too old. "I do," she said softly. "I do want to explore this, but I need you to be patient with me. It has been a long time and I'm frightened." Lucas smiled and took her hand gently. "I can do patient. I'm a cowboy, Katherine. Patience is part of the job description." Over the next few weeks, Lucas courted Katherine with old-fashioned propriety that both charmed and frustrated her. He came by the store every day. sometimes just for a few minutes to say hello, sometimes staying longer to help her with heavy lifting or restocking high shelves. He brought her small gifts, wildflowers, interesting rocks, once a perfectly preserved bird nest he had found fallen from a tree. He took her on walks after church every Sunday. He invited her to dinner at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, where the landlady served them her best dishes and beamed at them approvingly. He brought her more books to read and they discussed them earnestly, sometimes agreeing, sometimes debating, but always respectfully. He never once tried to kiss her, though Katherine found herself thinking about it more and more. He held her hand when they walked. He helped her onto and off of horses with his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary at her waist. But he never pushed for more, never presumed, never rushed her. It was driving Katherine slightly mad in the most wonderful way. Martha noticed, of course. "You are glowing," she told Katherine one afternoon when she stopped by the store. "I haven't seen you look this happy in years." "Is it that obvious?" Katherine asked, embarrassed but also pleased. "Only to everyone who knows you, Katherine, I am so happy for you. Lucas is a good man. Everyone in town can see it." "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop," Katherine admitted. "For him to realize I am too old or too set in my ways or too something. Or maybe he will just keep on appreciating you for exactly who you are," Martha suggested. "Not every story has to be tragic, you know. Some of them get to be happy." That evening, Lucas came by after he finished work at the ranch. He had cleaned up as he always did before seeing her, but there was dust on his boots and she could smell the outdoors on him. Sun, sage, and horses. "I have something to show you," he said. "Do you trust me?" "Yes," Katherine said, realizing it was true. She did trust him completely. He took her on horseback about a mile out of town to a spot where the land rose up in a small hill. From the top, you could see Palisades spread out below, the Grand River winding past it, and the mountains rising in the distance, already snow-capped at their peaks. "I come up here sometimes when I need to think," Lucas said. "It reminds me of why I love this country." They stood together watching the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. Katherine felt Lucas take her hand, and she laced her fingers through his. "Katherine," he said quietly, "I know we have only known each other for a few weeks. But I'm not a young man with unlimited time to waste. I know what I want. I want you. I want to court you properly, with the intention of marriage if you will have me. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to help you run your store and build a life together here in Palisade. I want to grow old with you, really old, not the barely middle-aged we are now." Katherine felt her heart pounding. Everything in her wanted to say yes immediately, but fear held her back. "Lucas, what if I can't give you children? I never conceived with Thomas in all our years together." "If you want a family, I want you," Lucas interrupted. "Children would be a blessing, but you are what I want, Katherine. If God sees fit to give us children, wonderful. If not, we will have each other. That's enough for me. Is it enough for you?" Katherine turned to face him fully. The setting sun lit his face, highlighting the gray at his temples, the lines around his eyes, the weathered skin of a man who had worked outdoors his whole life. He wasn't young, but neither was she. They were both people who had lived, who had loved and lost, who had scars and stories. They were perfectly matched in that way. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of losing someone again. I'm scared of not being enough. I'm scared of being too old to start over." "I'm scared too," Lucas said, "but I'm more scared of not trying. Katherine, I would rather have whatever time God gives us together than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Life is risk. Love is risk. But you are worth the risk to me." And then, finally, Lucas leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Katherine felt something inside her break free, some last wall she had been holding up crumbling under the tenderness of that kiss. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring 6 years of loneliness and longing into it. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Katherine, please. Let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are not too old for love, for happiness, for any of it." "Yes," Katherine whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Lucas let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way back to town. He picked Katherine up and spun her around, both of them laughing like the young people they no longer were but felt like in that moment. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and Katherine felt truly alive for the first time in years. They rode back to town in the twilight, sitting close together on Lucas's horse, the borrowed mare tied to follow behind. When they reached her store, Mrs. Morrison was just passing by and stopped to stare at them. "You two look happy," she observed with a knowing smile. "We are getting married," Lucas announced proudly. "About time," Mrs. Morrison said. "The whole town has been watching you court her proper. We were beginning to wonder if you were ever going to ask. Congratulations to you both." The news spread through Palisade like wildfire, as news always did in a small town. By the next morning, Katherine's store was full of well-wishers. Martha hugged her so hard she could barely breathe. Reverend Walsh stopped by to offer to perform the ceremony. Mrs. Chen appeared with a basket of fresh baked goods and an offer to host a small wedding breakfast at the boarding house. "We want to marry soon," Lucas told everyone. "We are not young people who need a long engagement. Would 2 weeks be too soon?" "2 weeks is perfect," Katherine said, squeezing his hand. Those 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Katherine cleaned her little house thoroughly and made room for Lucas's belongings, which were few but meaningful. His books, his few changes of clothes, some personal items from his family. Lucas spoke to Mr. Morrison about building a small addition onto Katherine's house, something that could serve as a proper bedroom and give them more space. Morrison, who had come to value Lucas as his best ranch hand, agreed to give him the time off needed for both the wedding and the building project. Katherine sewed herself a new dress for the wedding, a deep green that Martha insisted brought out her eyes. It wasn't white, of course. She was a widow remarrying, and there were certain proprieties to observe. But it was beautiful, and when she tried it on, she felt beautiful too. The night before the wedding, Martha came over to help Katherine pack up her things from her bedroom, as Lucas would be moving in after the ceremony. As they worked, Martha asked gently, "Are you sure about this? Not that I think you should not do it, but are you at peace with it?" "I am," Katherine said. "I was frightened at first, but now I'm just excited. Martha, I thought my life was over when Thomas died. I thought I had used up my allotment of happiness. But Lucas has shown me that there is still so much life to live, so much joy to experience. I'm not too old for this. I'm exactly the right age." Martha smiled and wiped her eyes. "You have no idea how happy I am to hear you say that." The wedding took place on a beautiful October Sunday in 1878. The church was full, which surprised Katherine. She hadn't realized how many friends she had made in Palisade over the years, how many lives she had touched through her kindness and steady presence. Seeing them all gathered to celebrate her happiness brought tears to her eyes. Lucas stood at the front of the church wearing a new suit, his hair freshly cut, his face clean-shaven. When Katherine walked down the aisle on Martha's husband's arm, since she had no father or brothers to perform the duty, she saw Lucas's eyes fill with tears. It made her love him even more, this man who was not afraid to show his emotions. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their days. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed her tenderly while the congregation applauded. The wedding breakfast at Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a joyful affair. There was more food than anyone could possibly eat, and someone had brought a fiddle and started playing music. Lucas danced with Katherine, and then with Mrs. Morrison, and then with Martha, while Katherine was claimed by Mr. Morrison and several other men from town. It was informal and warm and everything Katherine had not known she wanted. As the sun began to set, Lucas whispered in her ear, "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Whitmore?" Katherine smiled at the new name. "Yes, I am ready." They walked back to her house, now their house, hand in hand. Someone had decorated the porch with ribbons and flowers, probably Martha. Inside, everything was just as they had left it, but somehow it felt different. It felt like a new beginning. Lucas closed the door behind them and turned to Katherine. "I know we are not young," he said, "but I confess I am as nervous as a boy right now." "So am I," Katherine admitted. "It has been so long. Then we will figure it out together." Lucas took her hands in his. "No rush, no pressure. We have all the time in the world." They moved slowly, gently, learning each other. Katherine had forgotten how intimate it could be, this act of love. With Thomas it had been familiar, comfortable, but this was different. This was new and exciting and, yes, a little awkward, but also beautiful. They laughed at their clumsiness and took their time, and when they finally came together it felt right in a way Katherine had not expected to feel again. Afterward, lying in Lucas's arms in her small bed, Katherine felt completely at peace. "I love you," she said. "I didn't think I would ever say those words to anyone again, but I love you, Lucas Whitmore. And I love you, Katherine Whitmore. I have from almost the first moment I saw you." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for giving us a chance. Thank you for believing me when I said you are not too old for love." "You were right," Katherine said. "I was being foolish. Love does not have an age limit." Over the next few months, Katherine and Lucas settled into married life with surprising ease. Lucas proved to be an excellent partner in every way. He helped with the heavy work around the store, built the addition onto their house himself with help from some of the ranch hands, and treated Katherine with constant affection and respect. The town of Palisade embraced them as a couple. It was not unusual in the West for people to marry later in life, or to remarry after losing a spouse. Katherine found that she enjoyed being part of a couple again, enjoyed having someone to share her thoughts with at the end of the day, enjoyed the simple intimacy of cooking dinner together or reading aloud to each other in the evenings. Lucas continued working at the Morrison Ranch, but he had negotiated an arrangement where he worked fewer hours so he could help Katherine with the store during their busiest times. He had a natural head for business, and together they started making improvements, expanding their inventory, negotiating better prices with suppliers, even talking about eventually building a larger store building. In the spring of 1879, Katherine realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she thought it was simply her age, that she was entering the change of life. But when the nausea started and her breasts became tender, she began to wonder. She mentioned it to Martha, who insisted she see the doctor. Dr. Henderson was an older man who had been practicing medicine in Palisade since the town was founded. He examined Katherine thoroughly and then smiled at her. "Congratulations, Mrs. Whitmore. You are pregnant." Katherine stared at him in shock. "But I'm 44 years old. I never conceived before. How is this possible?" "Sometimes these things happen when we least expect them," Dr. Henderson said. "The important thing is that you appear to be healthy and the pregnancy seems to be progressing normally. You will need to be careful, of course." Women our age face more risks in childbirth, but there is no reason to think you cannot deliver a healthy baby. Katherine left the doctor's office in a daze. She had never expected this, had made peace years ago with being childless. What would Lucas think? They had never really discussed it beyond that first conversation where he had said children would be a blessing but not a requirement. When Lucas came home that evening, Katherine was sitting at the kitchen table, still trying to process the news. He took one look at her face and knelt beside her chair. "What's wrong? Are you ill? Did something happen?" "I'm pregnant," Katherine blurted out. Lucas's eyes went wide. "You're what?" "Pregnant, with child. The doctor confirmed it today." Katherine searched his face anxiously. "I know we did not plan this. I know I am old to be having a first child. I know it is a risk," but Lucas cut her off by kissing her soundly. When he pulled back, there were tears streaming down his face. "A baby. We are having a baby, we are," Katherine said, starting to cry herself. "Are you happy? Are you frightened? Because I am both." "I'm everything," Lucas said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I'm thrilled and terrified and amazed and grateful. Katherine, this is a miracle. I never dared to hope for this." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "We are going to be parents. I'm going to be a father. You are going to be a mother. How is this real?" Over the next few months, as Katherine's belly grew, the whole town rallied around them. The women of Palisade threw her a party and showered her with hand-sewn baby clothes, blankets, and advice. Lucas built a beautiful wooden cradle that rocked gently. They turned the new addition to their house into a nursery, painting it a cheerful yellow. Katherine had to reduce her hours at the store as the pregnancy progressed. She tired more easily and her back ached constantly. Dr. Henderson checked on her regularly, and while he maintained that everything was progressing well, he cautioned her to rest and not overexert herself. Lucas was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she put her feet up every afternoon and rubbed her swollen ankles every night. Katherine found it both annoying and endearing. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one evening when he tried to help her put on her shoes. "I know, but you are my wife and you are carrying our child. Let me take care of you." "You take care of me every day," Katherine said, softening, "but I need to keep doing things too. I will go mad if you treat me like an invalid." They found a balance. Katherine continued to work at the store, but for shorter hours. Lucas took on more of the physical work. Martha and other friends helped out when needed. It was a community effort, and Katherine found herself deeply grateful for the life they had built in Palisade. In November of 1879, Katherine went into labor. It was long and difficult, as first labors often are, and made more complicated by her age. Dr. Henderson was there the whole time, and Lucas held her hand and wiped her forehead and told her over and over that she was strong. She could do this. He loved her. After nearly 20 hours of labor, Katherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. He had dark hair like his father and strong lungs that he demonstrated immediately. Dr. Henderson placed the baby on Katherine's chest, and she looked down at him in wonder. "A son," she whispered. "We have a son, Lucas." Lucas was crying openly, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "He's perfect. You're perfect. I love you both so much." They named him Thomas Lucas Whitmore after both Katherine's first husband and his father. Katherine had worried that Lucas might object to using Thomas's name, but he had insisted. "Thomas was your first love and your partner for years," Lucas had said. "He helped shape you into the woman I love. It would be an honor to name our son after him." The first few months with baby Thomas were exhausting and overwhelming and wonderful. Katherine had never been so tired in her life, but she had also never been so happy. She would stand over the cradle watching him sleep, marveling that this perfect little person existed, that she and Lucas had created him together. Lucas was a devoted father. He would wake in the night to help with feedings, walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, singing to him in a soft voice. He continued working at the ranch but arranged his schedule so he was home as much as possible. The store had to be managed more carefully now. They hired a young woman named Sally to help, which freed Katherine to spend more time with Thomas while still keeping the business running. It was a new balance, and they found their way through trial and error. When Thomas was 6 months old, Katherine realized she was pregnant again. She was shocked and a bit dismayed. Her body was still recovering from the first pregnancy and birth, and she would be 45 years old when this baby arrived. But when she told Lucas, he was overjoyed. "Another baby, Katherine. We are so blessed." "We are also exhausted," Katherine pointed out, but she was smiling. "What are we going to do with 2 babies at our age? We are going to love them and raise them and probably collapse from exhaustion every night," Lucas said. "And it will be wonderful." This pregnancy was harder than the first. Katherine was more tired, more uncomfortable, more worried. Dr. Henderson monitored her closely and prescribed as much rest as possible. Lucas and Sally essentially ran the store together while Katherine focused on taking care of herself and Thomas. In August of 1880, Katherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter. The labor was shorter this time but no less intense. When the baby girl was placed in her arms, Katherine felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. They named her Margaret Rose Whitmore, after Lucas's mother. She had Katherine's lighter coloring and a quiet disposition that was very different from her boisterous brother. Now they were a family of 4. Lucas, at 43, and Katherine, at 45, found themselves with 2 babies under 2 years old. It was chaos and exhaustion and more love than either of them had dreamed possible. "You remember when you said you were too old for romance?" Lucas asked one night as they finally collapsed into bed after getting both children to sleep. "I was a fool," Katherine said. "I was too busy being afraid to see what was possible." "Well, I'm glad I disagreed with you." Lucas pulled her close. "Look at what we would have missed." The years that followed were full and busy. Thomas and Margaret grew from babies into toddlers into young children. Lucas eventually became foreman at the Morrison Ranch, which came with better pay and more respect. Katherine's store continued to thrive, and they were able to hire more help as needed. Palisade itself grew and prospered. The railroad brought more people and more commerce. New businesses opened. The town got its first real school, which meant Thomas and Margaret would have educational opportunities their parents had only dreamed of. Katherine and Lucas grew older together, gaining more gray hair and more wrinkles, but also more contentment and more joy. They had started their life together thinking they were too old for new beginnings, and instead, they had found that they were just the right age to appreciate what they had. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Lucas took Katherine back to the hilltop where he had proposed. They left the children, now 9 and 8 years old, in Martha's capable hands for the evening. It was the same season, early October, and the mountains were touched with snow just as they had been that first night. "Do you have any regrets?" Lucas asked, holding her close. "Not a single one," Katherine said honestly. "Well, maybe I regret all those years I spent thinking I was too old to be happy again, but I don't regret a moment since I said yes to you." "I love you more today than I did the day we married," Lucas said. "I did not think that was possible, but it's true. Every day with you is a gift. We are growing old together, just like you promised," Katherine said. "Really old now, not just middle-aged. And it's exactly as wonderful as I thought it would be." They stood together watching the sun set, just as they had 10 years before. But this time they were not at the beginning of their story. They were in the middle of it, with years behind them and years ahead, with children waiting for them at home and a whole life built together. Katherine thought back to that day when Lucas had first walked into her store. She had been so convinced that at 43 she was too old for love, too old for new beginnings, too old for happiness. But Lucas had disagreed, and he had courted her properly, patiently, persistently, until she had allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was not too late for her. And he had been right. It had not been too late. It had been exactly the right time. In the years that followed, Katherine and Lucas continued to build their life in Palisade. Thomas grew into a serious, studious boy who loved books as much as his parents did. Margaret was quieter but had a gift with animals and spent as much time as she could at the ranch with her father. They were different children, but both were deeply loved. The store expanded until it became one of the largest and most successful in the region. Lucas took on more responsibility at the Morrison Ranch and eventually became a part owner when Mr. Morrison decided to semi-retire. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, they were content. Katherine's hair went completely gray, and Lucas's too. They both developed the aches and pains of aging, but they still held hands when they walked. They still read to each other in the evenings. They still looked at each other with love and desire and profound gratitude. When Thomas was 14 and Margaret was 13, Katherine and Lucas sat them down for a serious conversation. "Your mother and I have been talking," Lucas said, "and we want you both to go to college. We have been saving money, and we believe we can afford to send you both, one at a time, to a good school." "But that's years away," Thomas protested, though he looked excited by the prospect. "Not that many years," Katherine said. "Time goes faster than you think. We want you to have opportunities we never had. We want you to be able to choose your own paths in life." "What if our paths lead us away from Palisade?" Margaret asked quietly. Katherine felt a pang at the thought, but she smiled. "Then we will miss you terribly, but we will be proud of you. The point of raising children is not to keep them tied to you forever. It's to give them wings so they can fly." Both children hugged their parents tightly, and Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. How had they gotten so big so fast? Where had the time gone? But time continued its relentless march forward, as it always did. Thomas went off to college in Denver to study business. Margaret surprised everyone by deciding to become a veterinarian, one of the few professions opening up to women in the modern age. She went to a veterinary college in Chicago, writing home faithfully every week. Katherine and Lucas found themselves alone again in their 50s, just the two of them as they had started. The house felt too quiet without the children, but they adjusted. They had more time for each other, for long conversations and leisurely walks, for traveling to visit their children and see new places. "We did it," Katherine said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "We raised two good children. We built a good business. We had a good life." "We are still having a good life," Lucas corrected gently. "It's not over yet." "No, it's not," Katherine agreed. "Lucas, do you remember when I said I was too old for romance?" "I remember, and I disagreed, as I recall." "You were right to disagree." "You were right about everything." Katherine took his hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for seeing possibilities I was too afraid to see." "Thank you for saying yes," Lucas said. "Thank you for taking a chance on a wandering cowboy who walked into your store one evening." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to come out. Katherine thought about the unlikely path her life had taken. If someone had told her that evening in 1878 when Lucas Whitmore first rode into Palisade that she would marry him, have two children, and build a full and happy life with him, she would have said they were crazy. She had been too old, too settled, too afraid. But fear and age had both proven to be illusions. The only real thing had been love and the courage to accept it when it arrived. Thomas came back to Palisade after college and took over management of the store, modernizing it and expanding it further. He married a lovely young woman he met in Denver, and they gave Katherine and Lucas their first grandchildren, twin boys who were holy terrors and absolute joys. Margaret became a successful veterinarian in Chicago, but eventually came back to Colorado, settling in Denver where there was more need for her services. She married a fellow veterinarian, and they had a daughter who was as quiet and thoughtful as her mother had been. Katherine and Lucas lived to see all their grandchildren born and to enjoy being grandparents, which they both agreed was even better than being parents, because you got all the fun with less of the responsibility. They traveled occasionally, but never strayed far from Palisade, which had become truly home for both of them. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1903, the whole town threw them a party. It was held in the same churchyard where they had attended their first social together all those years ago. Thomas and Margaret came with their families. Friends they had known for decades celebrated with them. It was a joyous occasion, full of laughter and love and memories. Lucas stood up to give a speech, his hair now completely white but his eyes still bright with life. 25 years ago, I walked into Katherine's store and she served me coffee and sugar. I knew right then that I had found something special, though I don't think she agreed at first. Everyone laughed, and Katherine felt herself blushing even after all these years. Katherine thought she was too old for romance, Lucas continued. She was 43 years old and convinced her life was already mapped out, but I disagreed. I told her she was exactly the right age at exactly the right time, and I was right. He smiled at her across the crowd. These 25 years have been the best of my life. We have faced challenges and joys, losses and gains, but we have faced them together. That's what marriage is. Partnership. Friendship. Love that grows deeper every year instead of fading. Katherine Whitmore, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Everyone applauded, and Katherine stood to join her husband, tears streaming down her face. Lucas pulled her into his arms and kissed her, not caring that the whole town was watching, and Katherine kissed him back, just as passionately as she had that first night on the hilltop. I love you, she whispered against his lips. Thank you for disagreeing with me. Always, Lucas whispered back. They danced that evening, slower than they had at their wedding, but no less joyfully. They were surrounded by children and grandchildren, by friends old and new, by a community that had embraced them and supported them through the years. It was everything Katherine had not known she wanted when she stood outside her store that evening in 1878, thinking her life was essentially over. But it had not been over. It had been a new beginning disguised as an ending. And that, Katherine thought as she rested her head against Lucas's shoulder, was the beautiful thing about life. You never really knew what was coming next. You never really knew when a handsome cowboy might walk into your life and change everything. Katherine Reynolds Whitmore lived to be 82 years old. She died peacefully in her sleep in the year 1918, with Lucas holding her hand. They had been married for 40 years, which seemed both like forever and not nearly long enough. Lucas grieved deeply but not despairingly. He had loved her and been loved by her, and that was more than many people ever got. He lived another 3 years, staying active and involved with his children and grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren who started arriving in those final years. He never remarried, and when asked about it, he would smile and say that he had already had the love of his life. He did not need another one, When Lucas died in 1921 at the age of 84, he was buried next to Katherine in the Palisades Cemetery. Their headstone was simple but meaningful: Lucas Whitmore, 1837–1921, and Katherine Whitmore, 1835–1918. Never too old for love, their children, who arranged for the headstone, felt it captured the essence of their parents' story perfectly. They had been two people who thought their lives were essentially over, who had found each other at an age when most people were settling into solitude, who had disagreed with the notion that romance had an expiration date, and who had courted each other properly and built a life that honored them both. The story of Lucas and Katherine became something of a legend in Palisade. Parents told it to their children as an example of never giving up on love. Young people heard it and took heart that life did not follow a single prescribed path. Older people heard it and remembered that it was never too late for new beginnings. The store that Katherine and Thomas built continued to operate for generations, eventually becoming a landmark in Palisade. The house that Lucas built additions onto still stood, home to a succession of families who loved it. The hill where Lucas proposed became known as Whitmore Hill, a popular spot for other couples seeking a beautiful view and perhaps a little of the magic that had blessed Lucas and Katherine. But more than physical landmarks, what endured was the lesson of their love story. That age was just a number. That fear should not be allowed to make life decisions. That sometimes the best things in life came when you least expected them. That proper courtship and respect never went out of style. That love could bloom at any age and be just as sweet, just as passionate, just as enduring as any young romance. Katherine had sighed that she was too old for romance, but Lucas had disagreed and courted her properly. And in doing so, he had given them both a love story for the ages, a romance that proved that the heart never really grows too old to love or be loved. They had taken a chance on each other when neither of them was young anymore, and they had been rewarded with decades of happiness, a family, a legacy, and a love that lasted beyond their lifetimes. In the end, Katherine's fear that she was too old had been nothing but an illusion. She had been exactly the right age to meet Lucas, exactly the right age to fall in love again, exactly the right age to build a new life. And Lucas, with his patience and persistence and genuine care, had shown her that truth not through grand gestures but through steady, daily love. Their story was not about dramatic rescues or impossible odds. It was about two ordinary people in an ordinary town finding something extraordinary together. It was about choosing love over fear, possibility over limitation, hope over resignation. It was about a cowboy who saw a woman's worth when she had stopped seeing it herself, and a woman who found the courage to believe him. And that, more than anything else, was why their story endured long after they were gone, whispered in the dusty streets of Palisade, Colorado, as an example of what love could be when you were brave enough to accept it, no matter your age.